O son of a scabby hyena! O despised ignoramus who cannot even write the letter alif! عطای دو خاصیت بدمزبی که نداشت، یکش بود ایدل کیوریاسیتی الگویی ششتا دیگه باز ولی تڑا بچا اونو گفتاره اینی تو شده اونو ترا an insatiable admiration for all outlandish wonders یعنی ظاهر بینی پساوا متاثر ظاهره این دو خاصیت بود که اون کراک دمانی اخلاق از نه وجود میورد. The thing was to strike at this crack. The next morning found little Nasreddin at the caravanserai again. Fired by his subtle schemes. Ali josh girfta hai chunki wo ek chand scheme barnama jor ke dekh mach kar ke deni. He had come running down too early. Zud as khana burjdat. The old woman was not there yet. He had to wait a full half hour. The boy fretted and chafed with impatience, running round and round the caravanserai and looking for the old woman down all the 4 roads that met there. The Macharra har taraf gasht gujar shudi khatu. The early sun was not hot. The air was clear and light. The shady places still preserved little fragrant coolness of the night. And the ground, copiously moistened by the waterers. Inar saqam guft. Kina mash kida dis girfta mit الري مشود سرقا أو باشي مقت كي كم تفتا بيشة. ده بخارا من المنطقة تمام. سقا كار شبيه مردم راو أو مدت أو باشي مقت. Was only beginning to give off a warm vapor. The tiled caps of the minarets. Ali minarha gesta tiled shudana, however, already dazzled the eyes with their molten gleam. And the blue limpid canopy above them was already tremulous and shimmering, promising a day of sweltering heat. Every minute, the hoarse, gurgling roar of the bazaar increased. Digali bazaar garm shuda rahi hai, sarsodai bazaar maya in volume, filling the city from end to end, rising skywards towards the dust. Amit khak mardum ziyad shuda mora, sarsodai bazaar u khak dudam amit bal shuda mora, sarsadam bal shuda mora. Together with the dust, shaking the halls of Allah and drowning heaven's angelic chorus, it was the voice of the big Bukhara man. But imagine that kini tamam sada yamzun mana. As dur kimin garna ki misl khak duduri da asman baljuda. Purring over his honeyed bread cake. Ki damzu chize kho, damzu cake kho, damzu biskit khshanga basha. Inter imagine that kina leni pura bazar, ki tu imagine ke nini Bukhara mena ini denzi karchanga. Presently the old woman appeared. With her was the black cat. The boy regretted that he had not thought of bringing a piece of boiled liver. Oh, wait, kash ke ma kama mitar am jigar sorkhada qot me urdu monu aziyad maraf. Psham khud badayna. With him from home, this horrid mangy cat was now his chief ally against the big Bukhara man. Una farq paida kdad. Kandwal az ma da gir khilaf az big Bukhara man kiya. Ono cat. Without wasting time, little Nasreddin boldly approached the old woman. Good morning, Grandma. Ajay salam, said he. Did you spend a quiet night? Shaut khub tershut? Good morning to you, returned the old woman, screwing up her rheumy eyes. The night passed quietly enough. شوق خوبه but the day I see is beginning unquietly. مگر سر صدای شرشوری روزی خوب کجا آرام مشاهدم. Nasreddin knew perfectly well what she was hinting at. گفت عجای فهمیدم تو چی میگی. But made believe as if he did not understand. The conversation had to be continued. So, bowing once more, he asked, "What was it a quiet night for your esteemed cat too?" The cat did not sleep very well because he was catching mice. The old woman answered, gazing steadily and searchingly at the boy. He shuffled about uneasily, disconcerted by her glance. His courage had suddenly melted away. And together with it, all the words which he had prepared beforehand vanished from his tongue. Silence ensued. Nasreddin caught his breath in a sigh, feeling the heat not only upon his face but even in his stomach. At last, with a great effort, he brought out in half a whisper, "But himmat, bazant alkaz danchik." Awaz burshud. I am that boy. Mamu bachayim. The one of yesterday, Mdirozna. And of the day before, Parirozna. The old woman was silent, her eyes fixed upon his face. Summoning all his powers, he added, now in a barely audible voice. The one who teased me. The one who teased you, do you remember? Had the old woman still kept silent, he would have turned and fled. As he had done the day before. But the old woman answered, "Do I remember you? She said, "I should think I do." You stuck your tongue out so far that I was astonished to see how long it was. Those words would have burned the boy to ashes, annihilated him, but for the old woman's smile. A sweet, kind smile that lit her face up as if with a sunbeam. Sunbeam. "Come closer, Pepesh," she said. "You are a good boy, with a kind heart, but a very mischievous one." From what I can see, now tell me straight and honestly, what have you come here for? What do you want? And let me tell you beforehand, if you have brought me again 2 tangas, as you did yesterday, you had better betake yourself with your money. To help the poor is a good and charitable deed. But it's not good for boys. But it is go خوب نیه to dip their fingers into their father's purse for that purpose. از جیب عتیق تو برگنی بایری بزمگی ما خیرات نمیتخ نمیچلا بایی. For where else are you able to procure 2 tangas every day? از خود چطور کمایی که 2 tangas هر روز؟ Little Nasreddin felt insulted. What? But recollected that she was a gypsy of Luli. بعض دیگه چمت قارش خواله مات بعض گفت نیامو خانه بدوش هری تو چیز مغیره. And judged him as she would have judged the boys of her own tribe. مثلی زوستوی قبیله خود فکر نه که ما یه بازی زوستوام میرقمه که دیدی ساعتی خو دست میده زد جیب شی. Oh no, said he. I have come today without 2 tangas. ما نوردم روپی. I never touch my father's purse. جیب عتیق دیستم نمیزدم. He often leaves me by myself. مرتنایا ده جای مره میده to sell jars in his shop. که ما دکان چی اونجی کوزه سودا کنم. کاسه ماسه. And I always give him the receipts in full. پیسه را ماسه حساب کده دیچ میدم. That is well, said the old woman approvingly. Shabash, in mirqam. On holidays, he gives me a quarter of a tanga and sometimes half a tanga. That you can take, that is not sinful, said the old woman. I am glad that I was mistaken. Do not be angry with me. After that, the conversation between them went smoothly and easily. Bandar started. Words caught into words like the cogs in wooden gears, and the mill began to revolve. مثل کی گراریا دباین خونی تر شور نمیده از بعد بازمو آسیا د شور خوردو شور مخرم. Little Nasreddin seated himself beside the old woman. قرر فالوشيش. Stroked the cat. Listened to his purring and praised his performance in the highest terms. और शेर तारीफ मना मगर तू दिखे नामी पिशी हो चीज़. Is he fond of milk and liver? शेर जिगर मुखरमी. That I cannot say. Much is khabarum, for I have never fed him with either. Na mazish dadam na zuish dadam. Much khabarum mukhra na mukhra. The old woman said with a laugh, I have not seen them myself for years. Khod man na shir didam na jigar sal hamsha. Tu chik mai pishir dada basham. This bitter confession, etaraf talakh, served the boy as a bridge for passing over to that which lay uppermost in his mind. Kharazi kesir damu diga scheme burd ki baltar bud the mind azi. Stumbling over his words in his agitation, he imparted to the old woman his plan against the big Bukhara man. Gufta jay. Yag amitar barnama asta da khilafi big Bukhara man. She listened at first with curiosity, then with trust, and finally was moved to tears of tender emotions. Ali az raham dil ch aush das bad qisse zir gosh kada ki ma ayni big Bukhara man intumunum bazin اول بودم التجسس يلنا زباد واستيستي باورش ما يبسم استيستي كريان اي بچه خدا ترنگاه کنه. Allah himself has sent you to me. In order to comfort me in my homeless old age. Dazi paspiri, dazi gharibi, bekhanagi, takiye dil az martu khuda raigda. In mind, you are an errant rogue. And had you been born among our tribe, you would have been the supreme chieftain. اگر تو د قبیلې زمو پیدا مشتی تو سردار از نام شدی. چې رقم تو د زیر ازگیخ د زیالی. In heart, however, you are pure and righteous. مگر تو از قبیلې زمو شده نمیدن چون دیرست تو پاگا. And may God grant you your mind always. هر چیزی که بخوای خدا تر بیدیا. Direct آینه را verify منم مگا clarify بچه. And may God grant that your mind always be a handmaid of your heart. कि अकल तो हमेशा खादिमी इश्क तो बाशा. سبحان الله. ये certificate खुदीश दाद ना. Nasreddin's plan required some preliminary expenses. कम बुनियादी खर्चा दकार बुद्ध दी गई project. About 15 tangas. If not a little more. The old woman trusted the boy so much, to much an extent that she did not hesitate to give him the money. Which she produced from somewhere deep within her dirty rags. There, this is all I have. She said, her hands trembling. Do not worry, Grandma. They will be returned to you with profit. Answered little Nasreddin. First he bent his steps towards Chinese Square, Chowgi, China, where all kinds of second-hand oddments were sold. There, at a suitable price, half a tanga, nim tanga, he bought a broken old wooden cage. Of fairly ample size. One of those cages in which the Chaikhana owners keep kekliks, hill partridges. قفصی که کنیش رفت دید خلاقو کار میده گفتن بس گفتی نمیده کارم پارتریج کستا مو کوگا هیلک پارتریج خو کوئی دیگه valued for their cackling which resembles the tinkle of glass مثل آوازی شیشه را برنا سر صدای جنا. Then the boy repaired to the woodworking row. باز رفت ده سرای ترکانا woodwork, where he found a craftsman who agreed to mend the cage. And that cost another half tanga. A third half tanga was paid to a painter, who painted the cage in all the colors that he had in stock. تمام رنگاره. ये रकम चीज़ी साउज़, ये चीज़ार तेरी रकम रंग कर सिर्फ हमें green, blue, red, yellow, and white. Towards the end, in a fit of generosity, the painter adorned the cage with a white golden border all around. Bas khosh shamad gusabartu kish special golden surroundings sham jor kami. Exclaiming at his handwork. Now, boy, you have but to catch the firebird with a diamond feather in her tail. نالی دیگه او کی بریزی که جور کردی تیاره دیگه بریز زون مو کی دمزدوم شیک دنا هیرا باشه اون پیدا کو دیگه تو منیزی بندزی. I have caught her already. گا گرفتم را. Answered Nasreddin, a firebird the like of which has never yet been seen in Bukhara. Firebird normally कैसा है एक चीज़ मगा dragon type of bird is that. Phoenix ura naam normally Phoenix कैसा firebird मगा कि वो खागिस्तर के मुझे बज़ापस मगा वो legendary bird is that. One with 4 feet and black fur. Charpai dara or sya push. Bringing the cage to the old woman, she threw her hands up in amazement at such splendor. Gaudi! Little Nasreddin's hied to the bazaar once again. This time, he did not return until noon. Come, Grandma, all is ready, said he. The old woman got up, grunting, and took the sleepy cat in her raw arms, who half opened a yellow eye, while the boy took the cage and they all went forth. They stopped at Chinese Square, at the crossing of 3 roads. Here began the 3 busiest trading rows. Astamam busy bazaar. The weaving, shoemaking, and hardware rows. Weaving khwami libas वगैरह की दोख्ता shoemaking, chapli, hardware. A little to one side of the crossroad, the old woman perceived a small tent of reed mats, fastened to 4 poles, the 2 openings, one facing the other, were covered with curtains of coarse, unbleached linen. Outside the tent sat its architect, the old man of the bazaar, who upon receiving 2 tangas from Nasreddin withdrew with valuable expressions of gratitude. Nasreddin 2 tanga da, bakul 2 tanga, thank you, raised qarar. The dukan istadi nali. The boy ushered the old woman into the tent. A post driven into the ground with a wide bit of board nailed on top of it served as a stand for the cage. The tent contained nothing else. The light fell from a hole in the roof. Stay here a while, Grandma, said Nasreddin. I have another matter to see. My last, Leaving the old woman, he plunged into shoemaker's row. The line is Chagar. And thence, Azunji, by a by street as a kucha, to the cistern of Yaski house, where the bazaar, scriveners, composers of all kinds of petitions and complaints, muharira, but mostly informers' missives used to sit in those days. It was the most strident, the most discordant and quarrelsome place in the bazaar. Here men were forever disputing, bickering, swearing, abusing, accusing, and boasting, and the very air here was thick with monstrous bare-faced lies. Har taraf ki sale kani durog mawara, such as confounded with imagination. Of the scriveners who abided here, there was not a man but had occupied in the past an official post lower than that of master of the court rolls somewhere in Istanbul, Tehran, or Khwarezm. Dego rakam darbar amdar navishta khando balad buda amda minji karbar paida kar Ir navishta ko, khadar navishta ko, uzurname zir navishta ko, mazradname zir navishta ko, khuda ahdname zir navishta ko. Not a man but had once given the king momentous advice to the very moment when his viziers and all the lords of his court had been stricken dumb with confusion. Not a man but had been awarded with aught lower than the decoration of the great lion. The clients usually assembled at the water cistern afternoon, and then the noise here somewhat abated. As the scriveners busied themselves with their affairs, little Nasreddin, however, came before noon, that is, at the hour of greatest commotion. As tamam ziyad kamu waqt kar, gawpag as tamam ziyad onmu waqtamat, temi chasht. When all was hub-hub and confusion, and it was impossible to make out who was disputing with whom and who was swearing at whom. Although خبر नहीं की जंग खदस किया की दरो किर दो मिज़ना तू दरो पैदा नहीं की खदस की पढ़ा दरा. For everyone was cursing everybody else. Arkas digar da uzdar hai. And everybody else cursing everyone. And there was such a wild uproar that it was a wonder the water of Yeski house could remain smooth and unruffled under such a hurricane of vituperation and execration. Mugai house tur khush namasha girde zikina jamas dikhskalo wa paga chag manan daukrinan. "Oh, son of a scabby hyena!" shouted a Pania old man, as gaunt, as twisted as the latter mim to his neighbor. "Oh, despised ignoramus who cannot even write the letter alif properly. All remember the petition that you filed in court last winter. Instead of the lamp of authority and piety, you wrote the damp author of poetry. What is? That is what you wrote. The lamp of authority and piety. Sirajul Munir. Huh? Janab, the damp author of poetry. Who wrote damp author of poetry? I did, his neighbor cried, choking with fury. This neighbor resembled the latter, but it is difficult to say what letter he did resemble. I mean, dimna nafar misli godana harf malum kudam alif be. Rather, did he resemble the whole Arabic alphabet at once? For he kept changing his shape by reason of constant palsied twitchings in every single part of his body. His head, his legs, his arms, his hands, and his back. It seemed as if his very entrails were shifting and shuffling about his belly. Did you forget how you very nearly ruined your client last year? By writing a petition to the Emir, which you addressed him as More Majesty instead of Your Majesty. More Majesty. All round began to giggle. Ha ha ha, everybody's laughing. Snicker, snort, and cackle in a variety of keys. The scriveners, who resembled a twisted meme, was with distorted countenance and gnashing teeth, preparing to return a fit retort. But little Nasreddin waited not to hear it and walked past. Page-draft. Amid his simoon of rancorous wrangling, he descried, not without difficulty, an elderly scrivener who took no part in the general squabble, not by reason of wisdom or mildness of temper, but for quite a different and more subtle reason. He was listening, with his long neck craned forward and his huge hairless skull shining in the sun, a skull whose weight seemed to have squashed his bony face. He sat listening, pouncing upon every word dropped unguardedly in the heat of mutual recrimination that could be made use of for the purpose of informing. He wrote it down secretly, there and then, in foreign characters, so that none of the other scriveners should by any chance discover it. When little Nasreddin approached him, he was busy writing down More Majesty. He whispered the words as his reed pen scratched away, and such a malicious, snake-like, ugly little smile lurked in the corners of his thin lips that one could unerringly savor beforehand the taste of that pungent, peppery dish which he was going to prepare for somebody in the not distant future. Ali Jasus, barname navishta kada rahiya. He looked up at little Nasreddin and asked, "What do you want, boy? I want a short little sign in Indian ink on Chinese paper." Signboard में खाएं. तमाम दिया नविश्तगार दिया. यो कैसे तक हमने नविश्ता करना? But Indian ink was the very Chinese paper, a very short one. Rezgag. "A short little sign," exclaimed the scrivener, delighted at having a client, and such a callow and inexperienced one at that. Before whom he could spread a peacock tale of lies. Misli pari thaus اللي قلت دروغار جيل متنا شيء رزقك بچاي دي, and boasting to its full span without fear of exposure. بس قلت دانواز मतलब relax قصدي دي رزقك بچاي قصدي چیز احتیاط بده. Thank you, lucky stars, boy, for having guided you to me. Sitara ki ko komak kada kemda peshma. For there is not a man in all Bukhara who can vie with me in writing with the brush in Indian ink and upon Chinese paper. When I was the chief clerk of the Grand Divan of Baghdad and wore upon my robe the state sign of the great lion, a gold badge studded with diamonds conferred upon me by the Caliph. The Mechidtv ki little Nasreddin was obliged to hear out these boastful lies, but we have no need to do so, all the more that each of us has heard their like on many occasions. Such boastful lying about their past grandeur is ever the way of men who have been cast down to the bottom of life. And it follows all generations without ever changing its essential pattern. After having related all the vicissitude of fate and the treacheries of his enemies, the scrivener left it at that. Then he asked, "What kind of a sign do you desire, boy? Speak. I shall make you happy." "Just 3 words in big letters," said Nasreddin. "Beast called cat." नाम से cat है लेकिन मसल में बच्चे जो खतरनाक monster है वो, beast है वो. "What? Repeat it." "Beast called cat." The scrivener pursed up his mouth and gave the boy a piercing glance out of his sharp little eyes. "Tell me, pray, what do you want such a sign for?" He asked. "He who pays knows what he pays for." Little Nasreddin answered evasively, "What is your price?" "A tanga and a half." "Yakunim tanga," came the reply. "So dear, for only 3 words?" "But what words?" returned the scrivener. "Beast!" He made a mysterious, ominous face. Called! He whispered the word, imparting it into a felonious, conspiratorial tone. Cat. He shuddered and recoiled as if he had touched a snake. Who would charge you anything less than that? Little Nasreddin was obliged to agree to the price of 1.5 tangas, albeit he failed to grasp the dangerous import of his sign. The scrivener pulled out a piece of yellowish Chinese paper from under his mat, trimmed it with a knife, armed himself with a brush, and proceeded to his task, inwardly regretting that of the 3 words with which he had been entrusted, he was unable, for all his dexterity, to carve out a single informer's report. Ali خو نوشتمونه ساين بریزی بس د کاری اصلی از دیوتی کی طرف که حال ما چیز نوشته کنم که ما امروز یک ساین نوشته که دیدم beast called cat ایبری چیز بود اگر ما افسر پرسان کنه کی چیز خیلی ما میگم beast. On his way back, little Nasreddin tarried only at the shoemaker's row, the line Chagar, where with shoemaker's glue he pasted the sign to a smooth, planed little board. Hang up outside the tent. It looked quite enticing. tent. The caged cat installed within the tent wowled drearily and lonesomely. گرفته ورده منه چیزی کاوک بان کده نه The old woman seated herself at the entrance with her crook. عجائب قرار دندر ازش. Little Nasreddin took up a position 3 paces away. Say قدم و طرف. خود Nasreddin میشنه near to the road. Then filling his lungs with air. بس پرمانه and let it out with such a piercing voice that the old woman's ears began to itch dreadfully. Beast called cat! Screamed Nasreddin, his face red with exertion. Sitting in a cage, he has 4 paws. 4 paws with the sharp claws. Like needles, he has a long tail that bends freely right and left, up and down, and is capable of assuming any shape or form. That of a hook or even a ring. Beast called cat. He curves his back and twitches his whiskers. He curves his back and twitches his whiskers. He has a black coat. He has yellow eyes that burn in the dark like smoldering coal. He makes unpleasant noises when he is hungry and nice ones when he is well fed. Beast called cat. Sitting in a cage, a strong, reliable cage. Anyone can see him for 2 coppers without the slightest risk of danger. A strong, reliable cage. Beast called cat. But 3 minutes had elapsed when his zeal was rewarded. Say daqa, Josh Jazbeshi? Jawab girift. A bazaar loiterer who had come out of the hardware row stopped, listened, and turned towards the tent. In appearance, he was the exact double of the big Bukhara man. Albeit on a smaller scale, his younger brother, one might say. Just as fat and ruddy and with the same dull, sleepy look, he came close up to Nasreddin and gazed stupefied at him. His arms sticking out from his body, a fatuous, blissful grin spread slowly over his face and his eyes became glassy and staring. "Beast called cat!" Nasreddin screamed right into his face. "Sitting in a cage to be contemplated for 2 coppers." The small Bukhara man stood there for a long time, listened to these cries with an air of quite imbecilic rapture. Then he went up to the old woman, rummaged in his girdle, dundal kadamitar, with fat fingers and tossed 2 coppers into her crock. The coins tinkled, the voice of little Nasreddin broke with excitement. This was victory. The small Bukhara man drew the curtain aside and walked into the tent. Nasreddin fell silent, waiting with bated breath for him to reappear. The small Bukhara man remained within the tent a very long time. What he was doing there, no one knew. Probably contemplating. When he came forth again, there was written upon his face perplexity, annoyance and bewilderment. As though someone in the tent had tried to fit a boot on his head or feed him with soap. He went up once more to little Nasreddin, who had renewed his cries, and stared at him again. Dumbstruck, with his arms wide apart, the former blissful grin having now given place to an air of troubled perplexity. Beast called cat. He guessed that he had been fooled. But in what way, he could not exactly make out. Thereat the small Bukhara man withdrew. 3 others now stood by the tent, quarreling noisily among themselves as to who was to be the first to contemplate the beast. These had more wits. Coming out of the tent, the last one held his side with laughter. Since it is the way of every dupe to desire that others should not be cleverer. None of the 3 mentioned a single word to the other, who were already awaiting their turn at the entrance. Little Mariamad man, huh? Ay bye. The contemplation of the beast continued throughout the day. It was contemplated by merchants, tajramat, by craftsmen, hunarmandamat, by visiting farmers, and even by learned men of Islam in white turbans, with the ends turned up. It was contemplated before feeding time, when it emitted noises unpleasant. And after a liver repast, when it emitted of noises none at all, but fell to licking itself and catching fleas. Fasha masha mizna. The tent did not close until drumbeat. The old woman counted the day's receipts. Drumbeat shuru shud, bazar band. Ajay guft bayar ki rupir jam ke nichan chuda hai. The old woman counted the day's receipts. 19 tangas. The very first day had more than covered all expenses, and the morrow promised a clear profit. Ki subhan dike bakhair khub se kamaini. The life of the old woman underwent a marvelous change. She now had even a roof of her own. For the tent was her inalienable property. She spent the night in it. The cat, let out of his cage, azmane qafas burkat, shira, walked around the corners, tail erect, dumam shikh, sniffing out his new dwelling. He now jayre the buikni chikhsainji. Little Nasreddin cried outside the tent for 3 more days. Ghazat. Beast, call, cat. Then told the old woman that she would have to hire someone else. As he had other affairs at home to attend to. For 3 tangas a day, they hired an old man. Say tanga the rose, yak bakul guftin jibya bhi khakh de. They is called cat. A former muazzin. Retired muazzin. This one shouted loud enough. But in a drawn out, prayerful voice. Come Kashmir duaya would come donji. Beast called cat. So that they had to buy him a drum. आखिर कुछ भाई आवाज़ तो मुझे मिशना बिया एक दिन डोल में खरीद रहे तो डाम ज़्यादा बोर which he beat at intervals for the greater attraction of the people, of the public. The boy did not forget the old woman and visited her every week. Hafta pesh mein ma salam alaik. This meeting was always a joyful event. For both, the old woman informed the boy of her increasing wealth. And every time offered him a half. And every time he refused. Taken only 1 tanga for sweetmeats in order not to offend her. Before going away, the boy looked into the tent and contemplated. The fikr the chord of it. Fed daily with liver or rose with jigar mukhrabashish. The cat had grown amazingly sleek and fat and lazy, and always slept on a cushion. Specially acquired for him. The boy opened the cage and stroked the cat, marveling at his silky fur. The cat slightly opened one eye, barely waged the tip of his tail, and went to sleep again. When winter came, the boy and old woman parted. She moved to Namangan, where she had some gypsy rishdadar. She rode away in a covered wagon. To such a degree of wealth had she attained, and how she wept. صندوقایش پر سنخانه رشته‌دارای خریه چطیا holidays the way there. And how she wept, embracing little Nasreddin at parting. Al bagal kata Nasreddin turwoye na. Kibekhi Nasreddin maga bas ke diga khalai. For the last time, the boy filled his gaze with the sight of the beast sitting on a cushion in his cage. Am akhir dafa ki nazar min da zami baygan ki rahi musha. بس سلمنا كين مي بشي قرار ضمن بنجرام تشتا دي متر بلي نالنشا خدا حافظ. And the wagon moved off. Bye bye. Tuna mangan.